I am Ellen Booth, 34 years old, a United States Army captain who spent her entire youth protecting this country and placed absolute trust in her husband. But on that fateful Wednesday night, when I returned home in my mud-stained uniform after a 48-hour shift, my world collapsed. Through the slightly ajar living room door, I saw Marcus, my husband of 7 years, raising a $500 glass of scotch, laughing with a colleague over the phone. He articulated every word, cold as a knife blade. Marrying Ellen was an investment error, Jason. She is just a grunt with a poverty mindset. I am looking for a way to liquidate this asset before she ruins the upper-class image I am building. He considers me a bad debt to be written off. But he forgot one thing. A soldier never dies on the marketplace. The thing he threw away is about to become the weapon that grinds his paper empire into dust. If you believe that human dignity is not measured by money and that traitors must pay the price, comment, justice, and hit subscribe right now. This story of rising from the ashes is for you. The digital clock on the dashboard of my beat-up Ford truck blinked 2:02 a.m. I had just survived 48 hours of hell, talking a distraught veteran off a ledge in a parking lot just outside of Baltimore. The smell of stale sweat, gun oil, and highway dust was baked into the fabric of my ACU, my Army combat uniform. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest. My eyes burned. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and curl up next to Marcus, to feel safe in the one place where I didn't have to be strong. I parked the truck down the street because the homeowners association in our Georgetown neighborhood frowned upon unsightly utility vehicles. I walked the block to our building, my combat boots heavy against the pavement. When I unlocked the door to the penthouse, I didn't just walk in. I hesitated. I sat down on the welcome mat outside and unlaced my boots, leaving them in the hallway. I did this because Marcus had a fit the last time I tracked a speck of dirt onto the imported Italian marble foyer he was so proud of. That was my life. A decorated officer on the battlefield, but a terrified guest in my own home, tiptoeing so I wouldn't tarnish his showroom. I expected darkness. I expected the quiet rhythm of his breathing from the bedroom. Instead, a warm golden glow spilled out from the living room, accompanied by the distinct, expensive sound of ice clinking against crystal. I walked softly in my socks, intending to surprise him, but then his voice stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't the warm, hushed tone he used when we were dating. It was the loud, brash, arrogant voice he put on for his finance bros. The voice of a man who thought he owned the world. "I'm telling you, Jason, I'm exhausted," Marcus said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I look at your wife. She's a model. Look at Theodore's wife, a senator's daughter. And then there's mine. Every time Ellen shows up at a firm gala with that clumsy walk and those calloused hands, I feel my stock value plummeting. Marrying her was the biggest strategic error of my life." I stood there, frozen in the shadows of the hallway. My socks felt cold against the marble. My heart didn't just break, it was being crushed in a vice. Marcus laughed, a sound that used to make me smile but now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "You know what it is? Ellen is like a good guard dog. She's loyal, she does what she's told, and she eats cheap. But you don't bring the guard dog into the house and let it sit on the silk sofa, Jason. It sheds. It smells." My dad was right. That blue-collar factory blood from Pennsylvania is too thick. You can't wash that out with money. I need a wife who knows how to spend capital to create an aura of class, not a soldier who hoards coupons and talks about honor. Does honor pay for the lease on the Porsche? Does honor get us a table at Le Diplomat? He took a sip of the scotch, a bottle he had bought with the bonus check from a contract I helped him secure with a military supplier. He was drinking my hard work while spitting on my existence. "I'm going to cut her loose," he said casually, as if talking about selling a losing stock. "I just need to figure out how to do it without her making a scene. She's useful for the domestic stuff, but as an asset, she's a liability." I didn't cry. It was the strangest thing. The moment he compared me to an animal, the moment he reduced 7 years of marriage to a balance sheet, my tears evaporated. In their place, something cold and hard snapped into position. It was the switch. The same switch I flipped when I entered a combat zone. The exhaustion vanished. My spine straightened. I walked out of the shadows and stepped directly into the living room light. Marcus jumped. His hand jerked, and the glass of red wine sitting on the side table, not the scotch in his hand, toppled over. The dark crimson liquid soaked instantly into the pristine white wool rug. "Ellen," he stammered, his face draining of color. I didn't hear the door. How long have you been standing there?" He started to stand up, putting on that fake, charming smile he used on clients, ready to spin a lie. "Honey, I was just blowing off steam with the guys. You know how it is, locker room talk." I didn't say a word. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. I didn't see my husband. I saw a hostile combatant. I saw a threat. I reached for my left hand. My fingers were rough, stained with grease from the truck, contrasting sharply with the sparkling diamond ring he had given me. A ring I treated like a holy relic. I always took it off before duty because I was terrified of scratching it. I treated that ring better than he had ever treated me. I slid the ring off my finger. It felt heavy, loaded with 7 years of lies. I walked forward, past the ruined rug, right up to the coffee table where he sat. I slammed the ring down onto the cold stone surface. The metal hit the stone with a sharp, violent clink that echoed through the silent penthouse. "You're right, Marcus," I said. My voice was steady, low, and terrifyingly calm. "I am a soldier. And the first rule of a soldier is that we never leave a teammate behind. We carry them. We bleed for them." I looked him dead in the eyes, watching his arrogance crumble into fear. "But you," I whispered, "you aren't a teammate. You're the enemy." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't wait for the excuses or the gaslighting. I turned on my heel, executing a perfect about-face, and walked back toward the door. I grabbed my muddy boots from the hallway, but I didn't put them on. I walked out of the penthouse barefoot, carrying my boots, leaving the warmth, the luxury, and the man I had loved behind. The heavy door clicked shut, severing my past from my future. I was homeless, I was exhausted, and I was alone. But as I walked down the quiet corridor toward the elevator, I felt lighter than I had in years. The war had just begun. The windshield wipers of my old Ford truck slapped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the Washington, D.C. wintry mix, that miserable combination of rain and sleet that coats everything in gray slush. I was driving aimlessly through the city, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My left hand felt strangely light. Every few seconds, my thumb would instinctively brush against my ring finger, searching for the diamond that wasn't there anymore. The stone was cold, hard, and expensive, but the empty space it left behind burned like a brand. As the city lights blurred through the wet glass, my mind didn't stay on the road. It drifted back, rewinding the tape of my life to find the exact moment I should have known better. It wasn't tonight. It wasn't the phone call. It started on day 1. I traveled back to our wedding reception at the Arlington Golf Club. It was a venue Marcus picked, stuffy, draped in silk, and smelling of old money and lilies. My parents had driven down from Pennsylvania in their rusted sedan. They were iron workers, salt-of-the-earth people from the Rust Belt who had built half the bridges in the tri-state area. My dad wore his best Sunday suit, which was a little tight across the shoulders, and my mom looked nervous in her department store dress. I watched from across the ballroom as my father extended his hand to Catherine, Marcus's mother. Dad's hands were massive, permanently stained with the grease and steel dust that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove. They were hands that built things, hands that provided for me. Catherine took his hand like she was picking up a dead fish. She touched his calloused palm with just the tips of her manicured fingers for a fraction of a second. And then I saw it. The moment she turned away, she reached into her clutch, pulled out a sanitizing wipe, and vigorously scrubbed her hand. She didn't even try to hide it. She looked at my father's back with a sneer that said everything I needed to know. "You are bacteria. You need to be disinfected from our lineage." I saw it, I froze, but I didn't say anything. I let it slide because I wanted so desperately to fit into this new, shiny world Marcus offered me. I betrayed my own blood with my silence. Marcus wasn't always like that. Or maybe he was just a better actor back then. I remembered the day we met 7 years ago. It was a volunteer event packing care packages for troops overseas. I was leading the ROTC group, barking orders and organizing the assembly line. Marcus was a graduate student in economics, looking a bit lost in his polo shirt. I was hauling a crate of canned goods, easily 60 pounds, throwing it onto the truck bed without breaking a sweat. He had stared at me, eyes wide. "Ellen," he had said later over coffee, looking at me with what I thought was adoration. "You are the most authentic woman I've ever met. You're strong. I'm so sick of these fragile debutantes who've never lifted anything heavier than a credit card." I fell for it. I thought his love bridged the gap between the factory floor and the boardroom. I thought he loved my strength. But looking back now through the windshield of a freezing truck, I realized the truth. He didn't love my strength. He was just entertained by it. I was a novelty, a blue-collar souvenir he picked up to feel rugged by association. But the novelty wore off. And then the erasure began. The memory that hurts the most isn't the wedding. It was the day he brought Theodore, his boss, home for dinner for the first time. I had come home early from base to help prepare. I walked into the living room and stopped cold. The wall above the fireplace was my pride. It was where I hung my service memorabilia. A photo of my unit in Afghanistan, my commendation letters, and center stage, my Bronze Star medal. That medal wasn't just metal and ribbon. It represented the worst day of my life and the men I saved. It was my soul on display. But the wall was bare. Or rather, it had been sanitized. My history was gone. In its place hung a beige, abstract painting with meaningless geometric shapes, something that looked like it cost more than my first car. "Marcus," I had called out, panic rising in my chest. "Where is my gear? Where's the Bronze Star?" He walked in, adjusting his tie, calm as ice. "Oh, that." I boxed it up. "It's in the basement storage." "Storage?" I choked out. "Why?" "Theodore is coming, Ellen," he said, as if explaining something to a slow child. "Those medals, the combat photos, they're a bit aggressive, don't you think? Violent. It throws off the feng shui. Plus, having military gear in the living room makes the place look cheap. It makes people think you're the hired security, not the lady of the house." He laughed. He actually laughed. I felt like I had been shot. He didn't see honor. He didn't see sacrifice. He saw cheap. He saw clutter. I went down to the basement that night. I found my Bronze Star stuffed into an old cardboard sneaker box, sitting next to a pile of broken holiday ornaments and discarded magazines. I sat on the cold concrete floor and held the box, but I didn't bring it back up. I left it there. I chose peace with my husband over respect for myself. That was the beginning of the end. From that day on, I started shrinking. I stopped telling stories about the army at dinner parties because Marcus would kick me under the table. I hid my combat boots under the bed. I forced myself to drink dry wines I hated and memorize the names of fashion designers I didn't care about. I killed the real Ellen Booth, piece by piece, trying to mold myself into the perfect Mrs. Whitfield shape. I became a ghost in my own life, a shadow wearing a cocktail dress. If you have ever felt like you had to shrink yourself or hide who you really are just to be loved by someone else, please take a second to support this story. Like this video and comment, "I am enough" below. Let's remind each other that our true worth is not something to be hidden in a box. The traffic light ahead turned red, snapping me back to the present. I looked down at myself. I was still wearing my ACU. It was dirty, it smelled of sweat, and it was wrinkled. But for the first time in years, looking at the digital camouflage pattern, I didn't feel shame. Marcus called this uniform a bad investment. He called it dirty. But as I sat there in the cold, wet night, alone and homeless, I realized this uniform was the only thing that had never lied to me. It didn't judge my background. It didn't care about my bank account. It only cared about what I could do and who I protected. I shifted the truck into gear as the light turned green. I had no home to go to, no husband, and no money. But the ghost was gone. Ellen Booth was back, and she had a war to fight. I found sanctuary, if you could call it that, in a 20-square-meter studio apartment in Southeast D.C., a world away from the manicured lawns and silent streets of Georgetown. Here, the soundtrack of the night wasn't classical music or the gentle hum of expensive HVAC systems. It was the screaming wail of police sirens and the rhythmic thumping of bass from passing cars. The walls were so thin that I became an involuntary participant in my neighbors' lives. To my left, a couple screamed at each other over unpaid bills. Above me, a baby cried with a lung capacity that would have impressed a drill sergeant. The air inside smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp drywall, a cold, cloying scent that clung to the back of my throat. It was the only place I could afford. My Army captain's salary was decent, but it was currently being bled dry by student loans and the retainer for a divorce attorney I hadn't wanted to hire. Marcus and his parents had moved with lightning speed. They hired a team of sharks, high-priced litigators who immediately filed motions to freeze our joint accounts, accusing me of financial impropriety and attempting to dissipate marital assets. It was a lie, of course. I hadn't touched a dime. But the legal maneuver worked. They cut off my access to everything. They wanted to starve me out. They wanted me to crawl back on my hands and knees, begging for a settlement just to eat. But they had severely miscalculated my threshold for pain. My first dinner as a single woman wasn't served on fine china. It came out of a brown plastic pouch. I had raided the surplus supply at the base logistics office for a few MREs, meals ready to eat. I sat on the cold linoleum floor because I didn't have a chair, nor the money to buy one. I tore open the package of spaghetti with meat sauce. I didn't even bother with the flameless ration heater. I just ate it cold, the congealed noodles tasting of preservatives and plastic. As I chewed the rubbery pasta, I made the mistake of opening my phone. Habit is a dangerous thing. I clicked on Instagram, and there he was. Marcus had just posted a story. He was sitting at a white-cloth table at a high-end steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear tuxedos and the menu doesn't list prices. He was holding up a glass of Cabernet, clinking glasses with Theodore. In front of them sat a massive cut of Wagyu beef, marbled and glistening. The caption read, "Freedom is enjoying Wagyu without being weighed down by people who don't understand the grind." New life. Yik Yeets, upgrade, alpha mindset. The cold spaghetti turned to ash in my mouth. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. He wasn't just celebrating his freedom, he was celebrating my destruction. That dinner cost more than my rent for this entire month. And the irony burned hotter than the whiskey he was probably drinking. He was paying for that meal with a bonus check he earned because I had introduced him to the right general 3 months ago. The luxury he was flaunting was built on the back of the woman he just discarded. I was about to throw the phone across the room when it buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a notification. It was an email. The sender name made my stomach drop. Catherine Whitfield. She didn't call. Calling would require hearing my voice, and Catherine treated me like a contagion. She preferred the sterile distance of digital text. I opened it, bracing myself. "Ellen," it began, sans greeting. "You should know your place by now. We always knew this day would come. You were, and will always be, a bad investment. Do the smart thing, sign the papers, walk away with what you came with, which is nothing, and disappear. Don't think about asking for alimony. The Whitfield legacy does not distribute charity to failures. Consider this your final notice." I read it twice, then a third time. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window ran down my spine. These were people who sat in the front pew at the National Cathedral every Sunday. They quoted scripture. They chaired charity galas for the poor. Yet, in private, they possessed a cruelty that was so precise, so calculated, it made the Taliban warlords I'd faced seem almost straightforward. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted me erased. I tossed the phone onto the pile of dirty laundry in the corner. I couldn't let them see me bleed. Not even from a distance. I reached into the breast pocket of my uniform jacket, which was hanging on the doorknob, and pulled out the small, weather-beaten Bible I had carried through 2 deployments. It was frayed at the edges, the pages stained with desert dust. I flipped it open to a passage I had memorized in the mountains of Kandahar. Psalm 23:4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. I sat there in the dim light of the street lamps filtering through the blinds, repeating those words until my breathing slowed. The valley. That's where I was. I was in the valley of the shadow of debt, of loneliness, of humiliation. But a valley isn't a grave, it's a pathway. You walk through it. You don't build a house in it. I wiped the angry tears from my face with the back of my hand. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The same feeling I had when the alarm klaxon sounded on base. Okay, I whispered to the empty, echoing room. You want to play war? Let's play. I set the alarm on my phone for 0430, not 07, not 06, or 0430. Tomorrow morning, I would run 10 miles before the sun came up. I would work double shifts at the base to clear my debt. I would sign up for night classes. I would turn this roach-infested shoebox into my personal boot camp. Marcus thought he had thrown me into the mud to rot. He was wrong. He didn't bury me. He planted me. And he had no idea what kind of thorns were about to grow from this dirt. 2 weeks later, I stood behind a plexiglass podium in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis in downtown D.C. The room was packed with the brass, high-ranking officers, defense contractors, and Pentagon decision-makers attending the annual Women in Defense Summit. I was there to present a paper I had written on optimizing last-mile logistics in hostile terrain. The data was solid. The strategy was sound. I knew this material better than anyone in the room because I had lived it. But as I looked out at the sea of uniforms and expensive suits, Marcus's voice began to loop in my head like a broken record. You're too aggressive, Ellen. You sound like a man. No one likes a loud woman. Tone it down. Be softer. I shrank. My shoulders hunched forward instinctively. I gripped the edges of the podium until my knuckles turned white, not out of command, but out of fear. Excuse me, I started, my voice wavering. If you could look at slide 4, I think, and I could be wrong here, but this might suggest a bottleneck. I hated myself as the words left my mouth. I was apologizing for facts. I was qualifying math. Sorry, I don't mean to bore you with the technical details, I mumbled halfway through. This is just a small idea I had regarding fuel convoys. It's probably not scalable, but... I saw a colonel in the front row frown and check his watch. A female executive from Lockheed Martin exchanged a confused glance with her neighbor. They weren't bored, they were disappointed. They had come to hear an expert, and instead, they got a terrified apology wrapped in a uniform. By the time I finished, the applause was polite, sparse, and humiliating. I gathered my notes with shaking hands and practically ran off the stage. I needed to escape. I bypassed the networking mixer in the lobby and made a beeline for the elevators. I just wanted to get back to my tiny apartment and hide. I pressed the button, staring at the floor, praying the doors would close before anyone recognized me as the woman who just choked on stage. The doors slid open. I stepped in and jammed my finger on the lobby button. Just as the metal doors were sealing me inside my safe cocoon, a hand, weathered, strong, and adorned with a West Point class ring, shot out and blocked the sensor. The doors bounced back open. Standing there was General Patricia Holbrook. She wasn't just a general, she was a legend. 4 stars. The first woman to command the Army Materiel Command. She was the Iron Lady of Logistics. And right now she was staring at me with eyes that looked like they could cut through steel plating. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, trapping us together in the quiet hum of the shaft. Captain Booth, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the small space instantly. It was a command voice, deep and resonant. Ma'am. I snapped to attention, my heart hammering against my ribs. At ease, she waved a dismissive hand, but her eyes never left my face. You have the brain of a commander, Booth. I read your white paper. It's brilliant. You just identified a redundancy that could save the Department of Defense $20 million in fiscal year 1 alone. I opened my mouth to say thank you, but she cut me off. So why? She stepped closer, invading my personal space. Did you stand on that stage and act like a frightened mouse? You apologized 5 times in 10 minutes. You qualified your expertise with, I think, and maybe. Why? I stammered, reverting to old habits. I didn't want to come across as too abrasive. I was afraid I was being too pushy. General Holbrook let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Who taught you that? Who told you that competence is abrasive? I looked down at my boots. My husband, my ex-husband. He said I needed to be softer, that my intensity was a liability. Your ex-husband sounds like a man who was terrified of your power, so he tried to convince you that you didn't have any. The general reached out. For a second, I thought she was going to strike me. Instead, her hands landed on the lapels of my dress uniform. She adjusted my collar, straightening it with a surprisingly maternal, yet firm touch. She smoothed out the ribbon rack on my chest. Listen to me, Captain, she said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. In his world, the world of finance and cocktail parties, fake humility might be a currency. They sell smoke, they sell image. But we deal in reality. In our line of work, hesitation kills soldiers. Doubt destroys supply lines. She stepped back and looked me up and down, nodding with approval. Your toughness, your discipline, your ability to endure pain, those are not character flaws, Ellen. Those are assets. You are a weapon, a precision instrument, and you never ever apologize for being sharp. You use that sharpness to cut through the red tape and the idiots who stand in your way. The elevator dinged. We had reached the lobby. The doors opened, revealing the bustling crowd of the hotel foyer. I stood there, stunned. It felt like someone had just turned the lights on in a room I had been sitting in the dark in for 7 years. Asset. Not a bad investment. An asset. General Holbrook stepped out, then paused. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a card. It wasn't flimsy paper. It was made of black metal, laser-etched with gold lettering. It hit my palm with a satisfying weight. I'm starting a private strategic consulting firm next month, she said, not looking back at me. I need a director of operations. I need someone who doesn't know how to quit. Call me when you're done playing the victim and are ready to be a predator. She walked away, parting the crowd of lobbyists and officers like the Red Sea. I stood alone in the open elevator, gripping the cold metal card in my hand. My heart was racing, but not from fear this time. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, a heat, a burning desire I hadn't felt since I was a cadet. It was ambition. Marcus had called me a bad investment. He threw me away because he thought I had no value. I looked at the card, then at my reflection in the polished brass of the elevator wall. I wasn't a mouse. I wasn't a guard dog. I was a United States Army captain. And I was about to show Marcus and the world exactly what kind of return on investment I could generate. My life transformed into a closed loop of military-grade discipline. It wasn't a lifestyle. It was a survival strategy. Every morning, the alarm on my phone cut through the silence at 04:30, sharp. There was no snooze button. There was no lying in bed contemplating the warmth of the covers. I was up, laced into my running shoes, and out the door of my shoebox apartment before the streetlights turned off. I ran 10 miles every single morning through the cracked pavements of Southeast DC, regardless of the weather. Rain, sleet, or the suffocating humidity of a DC summer. It didn't matter. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. It was the only way to physically exhaust the anger that still simmered in my chest. My schedule was a logistical masterpiece, tighter than any convoy plan I had ever drafted. From 0 to 17, I was at the base, pushing paperwork and fighting the bureaucracy to secure benefits for enlisted soldiers. From 18 to 22, I was a student again, sitting in lecture halls at George Washington University, pursuing a master's in public policy funded by the GI Bill. I was the oldest person in the room, surrounded by 22-year-olds in hoodies, but I took notes with the intensity of a court stenographer. Then came the third shift. From 23 until 2:00 in the morning, I worked remotely doing forensic bookkeeping for General Holbrook's startup. I ate dinner in my car, usually a cold sandwich or a protein bar, washing it down with black gas station coffee that tasted like battery acid. My friends from the old life, the few who still had my number, called me crazy. They said I was burning the candle at both ends. They didn't understand. I wasn't just working, I was building a fortress. Every page I read, every dollar I saved, every mile I ran was a brick in a wall that Marcus could never knock down again. Speaking of Marcus, while I was scraping by on 4 hours of sleep, he was living in a Technicolor dream. Or at least, that's what his social media wanted the world to believe. During a rare break between classes, I saw photos of him on a yacht in South Beach, Miami. He was tan, holding a thick cigar, surrounded by women who looked like they were cast for a reality TV show. He had just bought a new Porsche 911 GT3. I knew this because he posted a close-up of the vanity plate, Wolf. It was so on the nose, it was almost funny. He really believed he was the apex predator of the financial world. A few days later, a text popped up from a blocked number. It was a message relayed through his lawyer, but the tone was unmistakably Marcus. Hope you have enough for the heating bill this winter, Elle. It's supposed to be a cold one. Let me know if you need me to authorize a small disbursement from the frozen assets. I can toss you some crumbs. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him exactly where he could shove his crumbs. But I didn't. Instead, I screenshotted the message, printed it out, and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, right next to my syllabus. That text wasn't an insult. It was high-octane fuel. Every time my eyes started to droop at 1 a.m., I looked at that message and I woke right back up. The hardest moment, however, wasn't the work. It was the isolation. Emma, my best friend from college, sent me an invitation to her wedding. It was going to be the event of the season in Georgetown. Then came the follow-up text. Ellen, I know things are tough. Marcus is the gold sponsor for the reception, and he's bringing his new fiancée. But I really want you there. You can be a bridesmaid. I can even lend you an old dress so you don't have to buy one. I stared at my banking app. Available balance, $50 through 32 hours. I looked at the stack of textbooks on my wobbly IKEA desk. I looked at the loaner dress offer, which reeked of pity. Go there to be a prop? To be the charity case in the corner while Marcus held court? I typed back, my fingers trembling. Sorry, Emma. Duty calls. I'm on a field exercise that weekend. Can't get out of it. That night, I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark of my tiny apartment and let myself cry. Just for 20 minutes. I grieved the loss of the life I thought I was supposed to have. I grieved the loneliness that felt like a physical weight on my chest. But when the 20 minutes were up, I wiped my face, turned on the desk lamp, and opened my statistics textbook. The next morning, the alarm went off at 4:30. I got up. No exceptions, no excuses. 2 years blurred into a montage of caffeine, adrenaline, and textbooks. Then came the day. Graduation. The auditorium was packed. The air smelled of floor wax and expensive bouquets. Parents were jostling for position with cameras, cheering as their children's names were called. I sat in the front row, wearing the academic regalia over a nice dress I'd bought at a thrift store. Ellen Booth, valedictorian, summa cum laude. The dean announced my name. I walked across the stage, the mortarboard cap sitting securely on my head. I looked down into the VIP section where the families of the honor students sat. My row was empty. My parents in Pennsylvania were too frail to travel, and obviously there was no husband to cheer for me. For a split second, the silence of those empty chairs hit me hard. But then, a sound erupted from the back of the hall. It started with a single, booming clap, then multiplied. I looked up, past the blinding stage lights. Standing in the back row, creating a wall of olive drab green, were 10 soldiers from my old unit, and in the center of them stood General Patricia Holbrook, in her full dress blues. They weren't just clapping. As I held my diploma high, they stopped cheering and snapped to attention. In unison, they rendered a slow, crisp hand salute. The crowd went silent, watching the display of respect. My throat tightened. Tears pricked my eyes, but I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. Marcus had family money. He had connections. But he could never buy this. Family isn't about blood, and it certainly isn't about a marriage license. Family are the people who stand tall for you when the rest of the world remains seated. I returned the salute, sharp and proud. The grind was over. The victim was dead. I was educated, I was hardened, and I was armed. I was ready for war. The Willard Intercontinental Hotel is more than just a venue. In Washington, D.C., it is the epicenter of power. It's where presidents sleep before their inauguration and where deals that shape the globe are whispered over martinis. General Holbrook had brought me here for the annual Veterans Charity Gala. But this time, I wasn't just a +1 or a silent wife standing in the shadow of a husband's ego. I was there as the Director of Strategic Operations for Booth Solutions. I bypassed the sea of sequins and tulle. Instead of a gown, I wore a bespoke, jet-black trouser suit, tailored to within an inch of its life. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. I wore no jewelry except for a simple watch. I didn't look like a decoration. I looked like I owned the building. I stepped into the ballroom, scanning the crowd with the practiced eye of a tactical officer. And then, I saw him. Marcus stood near the ice sculpture, holding court. He had his arm draped possessively around a woman in a screaming red dress that dripped with diamonds. It was Melissa, the interior designer he used to hire for our penthouse renovations. And apparently, for his personal life, too. She looked at the room with hungry eyes, desperate to be seen. I didn't turn away. I walked straight toward the bar near them. Marcus spotted me, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to a familiar, sneering amusement. He whispered something to Melissa, and they both giggled before sauntering over. "Well, look who it is," Marcus announced, his voice booming a little too loudly, thick with the scent of aged bourbon. He looked me up and down, grimacing. "Captain Ellen, still playing dress-up? Trying to convince everyone you're a businesswoman now?" He gestured to my suit with his glass. "Where did you get that? The discount rack at Macy's? You look stiff as a board, Elle. Zero femininity. You look like the help." Melissa covered her mouth with a manicured hand, offering a fake, pitying smile. "Oh, honey, don't be mean. She probably had to save up all year just to afford the fabric. Not everyone understands haute couture." Marcus turned to the group of men standing nearby, junior brokers who hung on his every word. "Gentlemen, meet my ex-wife. A good woman, really, salt of the earth. But sadly, she just lacks vision. She couldn't see the big picture." 3 years ago, this public humiliation would have sent me running to the bathroom to heave sobs into a paper towel. But the Ellen standing there tonight didn't feel the sting of tears. She just felt a dry, detached amusement. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, maintaining perfect eye contact. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the ambient noise of the jazz band. "This vision you keep talking about, would that happen to be Theodore's Genesis Fund?" Marcus froze. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "How do you know that name? That's a confidential project." I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only he and Melissa could hear. "I know because I work with real logistics now, Marcus. Not projections, not smoke. I deal in hard data. And the word around the Beltway is that the SEC has taken a very sudden, very intense interest in Theodore's offshore wire transfers to the Cayman Islands." His face went pale, the flush of alcohol draining away instantly. "I'd be careful about the foundation of that new house you're building," I added, looking at Melissa's diamond necklace. "The ground is shaking, Marcus. You just can't feel it yet because you're too drunk on your own hype." He blinked rapidly, then let out a forced, high-pitched laugh. "You're delusional. You're just jealous because I'm about to ring the opening bell and you're pushing paper for the army." "Is that so?" Before I could respond further, the crowd parted. A tall, silver-haired man with the bearing of a lion walked toward us. It was Senator Vance, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, one of the most powerful men on Capitol Hill. Marcus straightened his spine, putting on his best sycophantic smile. He extended his hand eagerly. Senator Vance, an honor! Marcus Whitfield, from the Genesis. The senator didn't even blink. He looked right through Marcus as if he were a waiter holding a tray of empty glasses. He stepped past Marcus's outstretched hand and turned directly to me. Ms. Booth, the senator boomed, his face lighting up with genuine respect. He took my hand in a firm, two-handed shake. General Holbrook showed me your proposal on supply chain resilience this morning. It is exceptional work. The committee is very impressed. My scheduler is going to reach out. I want to buy you lunch next week to discuss implementation. Marcus stood there, his hand still floating in empty air. His mouth hung open. Melissa looked back and forth between us, confused and terrified. The circle of junior brokers stepped away from Marcus, sensing the shift in power like sharks sensing blood in the water. I smiled politely at the senator. I would be honored, Senator. I look forward to it. As the senator moved on, I turned back to Marcus one last time. He looked small. He looked cheap. Enjoy the party, Marcus, I said, my voice soft but final. Eat the shrimp, drink the good scotch, really savor it. I leaned in. Because I have a feeling this might be the last time you're ever invited to a room like this. There is nothing more satisfying than watching the tables turn on someone who thought they were untouchable. If you believe in karma and love seeing the underdog win, hit that like button right now and comment karma below. Let's show the world that character always outlasts cash. I turned on my heel and walked away, the click of my heels sounding like a countdown clock ticking toward his destruction. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was coming next. 3 years after walking out of that Georgetown penthouse with nothing but my boots and my pride, I stood in front of a glass door on the 12th floor of an office building in Rosslyn, Virginia. The view from the window was spectacular. Directly across the Potomac River, the massive, imposing geometric shape of the Pentagon sat like a fortress. Etched onto the glass door in simple, clean lettering was the name, Booth Strategic Solutions. Inside, there were no imported Italian marble floors. There were no abstract paintings that cost more than a Honda Civic, and certainly no Persian rugs to worry about dirtying. My office was utilitarian, smelling of fresh coffee and printer toner. It was filled with rows of functional standing desks and the hum of intense productivity. I looked out at my team. There was Sarah, a military spouse who had moved 5 times in 7 years and couldn't hold a traditional job because of it. There was Mike, a former logistics sergeant who lost his left leg to an IED in Kandahar. Marcus had once referred to people like them as societal burdens or charity cases. I called them something else, the most disciplined, adaptable workforce on the planet. They knew how to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And I was right. We weren't just a company. We were a unit. Our biggest test came on a rainy Tuesday in November. We had made the shortlist for a massive Department of Defense logistics contract, a specialized support package for forward-deployed units. We walked into the conference room inside the Pentagon. The air was thin, recycled, and heavy with tension. Sitting on the other side of the aisle was our competition, a consortium backed by a massive private equity firm. And representing their financial interests was none other than the Genesis Fund. Marcus was there, sitting next to Theodore. They looked like they had stepped out of a GQ photo shoot, armed with a flashy PowerPoint presentation full of buzzwords like synergy, vertical integration, and ROI maximization. When it was their turn to present, Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket. He spoke smoothly, using a laser pointer to circle graphs that promised the generals huge cost savings through automated algorithms. We project a 20% reduction in overhead by streamlining the insurance protocols, Marcus said, flashing a charming smile at the procurement officers. It's all about hedging the financial risk of the supply chain. The panel of generals remained stone-faced. Then, it was my turn. I didn't have a laser pointer. I didn't have a slideshow with animated transitions. I walked up to the table and dropped a 3-inch thick binder onto the mahogany surface. The thud echoed in the room. Gentlemen, I said, my voice steady, my opponent talks about financial risk. I'm here to talk about operational risk. I opened the binder to page 42. Your convoys in Sector 4 aren't being delayed by insurance protocols. They are being delayed because the current fuel mixture degrades in the high-altitude filters used by the new transport trucks. My team knows this because my lead analyst drove those trucks for 3 years. I looked directly at Marcus. You can hedge financial risk with algorithms, but when a supply chain breaks in a combat zone, you don't lose profit margins, you lose Marines. I know the price of a late shipment, and it isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in flag-draped coffins. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair. Theodore looked down at his notepad. The lead general at the head of the table slowly closed Marcus's glossy brochure and pulled my binder closer to him. We left the room without shaking hands. A week later, I was sitting in my office reviewing payroll when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I knew by heart, General Holbrook. My hands shook slightly as I picked up. General? Ellen. Her voice was warm, lacking its usual command edge. The procurement board just adjourned. They made their decision. I held my breath, my heart pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. They chose Booth Solutions, she said. It's a $15 million contract, base year. The chairman said it was the easiest decision they've made all fiscal year. He said they needed a partner who knows the smell of the battlefield, not the smell of money. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto my desk, but I didn't care. I sank to the floor, my back against the cheap drywall, and I wept. I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from the sheer, overwhelming release of 3 years of grinding pressure. Marcus had called me a bad investment. He had thrown me away. And today, that bad investment just generated a return he would never see a penny of. 3 months after the contract was signed, I drove my new SUV, bought with my own money, down the cobblestone streets of Old Town Alexandria. I pulled up to a red brick townhouse built in the 1800s. It wasn't a cold glass penthouse in the sky. It was warm, historic, and solid. It had character. I walked up the steps and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I walked into the living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the hardwood floors. It was empty, waiting for me to fill it. I opened my bag and pulled out a framed shadow box. Inside, resting on black velvet, was my bronze star medal. For years, it had sat in a damp cardboard box in a basement because my husband thought it was too violent and tacky. He thought it ruined his aesthetic. I took a hammer and a nail, found the center of the wall above the fireplace, the place of honor, and drove the nail in. I hung the medal. I stepped back and looked at it. It caught the light, gleaming gold and scarlet. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old wood and new beginnings. No one would ever tell me to hide my scars again. No one would ever tell me I was taking up too much space. I was the CEO. I was the homeowner. And this was my territory. Monday morning usually started with the smell of brewing coffee and the quiet hum of the city waking up. But at 6:00 a.m., the peace of my Alexandria townhouse was shattered by the glowing red banner scrolling across the bottom of my television screen. I was standing in my kitchen, mug in hand, watching CNN. The bold white letters on the chyron screamed, "Breaking news, FBI raids, Genesis Fund headquarters. CEO Theodore Carmichael arrested in $5 billion Ponzi scheme." The camera cut to live footage from a helicopter circling above an office park in downtown D.C., the same glass tower where Marcus had sneered at me just weeks ago. Agents in blue windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow on the back were carrying out boxes of evidence. And then, the camera cut to the ground level for the perp walk. First came Theodore, his head bowed low, his wrists handcuffed behind his back. But right behind him, flanked by 2 federal marshals, was a face I knew better than my own. It was Marcus. He didn't look like the master of the universe who drove a Porsche with Wolf on the license plate. He looked small. His expensive Italian dress shirt was untucked and wrinkled. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was a mess. He was frantically trying to shield his face from the flashing strobes of the press photographers, terror etched into every line of his features. The paper empire he had worshipped, the high society image he had sacrificed his marriage to build, had collapsed in a single morning. By 8:00 a.m., the full scope of the disaster began to unfold. My phone was vibrating incessantly on the kitchen counter, lighting up with texts from mutual acquaintances we hadn't spoken to in years. The news was spreading like wildfire through the DC grapevine. It turned out that Marcus hadn't just worked for the fraud, he had bought into it. In a desperate bid to secure a managing partner seat, he had leveraged everything. I learned through the grapevine that he had taken out a second mortgage on the penthouse, maxed out his credit lines, and even borrowed money from private lenders to go all in on Theodore's fund. He believed the lie because he wanted the status that came with it. Now, the SEC had frozen everything. The assets were seized. The penthouse was sealed. The Porsche was likely on a tow truck. He was destitute. The social fallout was even faster than the financial one. I opened Instagram and saw a new post from Melissa. The photo was a black screen with white text, a classic PR damage control move. I am shocked and devastated by the news regarding Marcus Whitfield. I had absolutely no knowledge of his business dealings. I've ended our engagement effective immediately and am cooperating fully with authorities. I ask for privacy as I heal from this deception. She had scrubbed every photo of him from her feed. The woman who wore his diamonds last week was now treating him like a radioactive isotope. The fair-weather friends who drank his scotch were already blocking his number. He was completely, utterly alone. But the final blow, the one that actually made me shiver, didn't come from the FBI or the fiancé. It came from his blood. Around noon, the Washington Post published a short, brutal statement in their business section. It was from Catherine and Robert Whitfield, Marcus's parents. I read the cold, legalistic phrasing, and I could hear Catherine's voice in my head. The Whitfield family is deeply disappointed by the allegations against our son, Marcus. We wish to clarify that the family trust has no connection to the Genesis Fund or its operations. We have always upheld the strictest adherence to the law and do not condone any form of financial impropriety. We are distancing ourselves from these activities to protect the integrity of the family business. They didn't offer him support. They didn't hire him a lawyer. They publicly disowned him to save their own reputation. They cut off their own son the moment he became a liability, exactly the same way they had cut me off. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange, cold pity. Marcus had sold his soul to please these people. He had thrown away a wife who would have stood by him in a trench just to earn the approval of parents who saw him as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. He had spent his life trying to be one of them, and in the end, they threw him under the bus without blinking. When I arrived at the office later that afternoon, the mood was electric. My staff knew the history. They had seen the news. "Are we ordering pizza?" Sarah asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Maybe some champagne. It feels like we should be celebrating." I looked at the TV screen mounted on the wall, which was replaying the footage of Marcus being shoved into the back of a police cruiser. "No," I said quietly. "Turn it off." Sarah looked surprised, but she clicked the remote and the screen went black. "We aren't celebrating," I told the team. "There's no joy in watching a man drown, even if he dug the pool himself." I walked into my office and sat down at my desk. I didn't feel the manic glee of revenge I thought I would. I just felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. I didn't need to lift a finger to destroy Marcus. Life, and his own character, had done the work for me. The best revenge wasn't stomping on his grave. It was standing on the high ground, breathing clean air, while he sank into the mud he had created. I pulled a file from my to-do stack. It was the paperwork for the new scholarship fund I was endowing for ROTC cadets. I uncapped my pen and signed the check. The world outside was chaotic, loud and falling apart for the Whitfields. But in here, in the house that I built, it was business as usual. 6 months had passed since the FBI raid that turned my ex-husband's life into a national headline. In that time, the noise had quieted down. The news cycle moved on to the next scandal, leaving the wreckage behind. I hadn't heard a whisper from Marcus, mostly because I had blocked his number, his email, and his social media accounts on the day he was arrested. But there was one channel I had forgotten to close: LinkedIn. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a notification popped up on my laptop screen. It was an in-mail request. The profile photo was gone, replaced by a generic gray silhouette, but the name was unmistakable. The message was short, desperate, and devoid of the arrogance that used to drip from his every sentence. Ellen, please. I'm in Rosslyn, just 15 minutes. I have nobody else. I stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. The old Ellen, the one who tried to fix broken things, would have felt a pang of guilt. But the CEO of Booth Solutions didn't feel guilt. She felt curiosity. I wanted to see what remained of the man who once claimed he was a god among insects. I replied with a location. The coffee shop in the lobby of my office building, my turf, my terms. I took the elevator down 10 minutes later. He was already there, sitting at a small corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee that looked like it had gone cold. I almost walked past him. The man sitting there wasn't Marcus Whitfield, the wolf of Georgetown. This man looked like a ghost haunting his own body. He had lost at least 20 pounds. His hair, once thick and dyed a rich chestnut, was thinning and streaked with premature gray. Gone were the Italian silk suits and the Patek Philippe watch. He was wearing a faded navy blue polo shirt that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a hamper, and his wrists were bare. He looked up as I approached. The confidence was gone, replaced by the skittish anxiety of a cornered animal. Ellen, he breathed out, half rising from his chair before sinking back down. Thank you. God, thank you for coming. I didn't smile. I sat down opposite him, placing my phone face down on the table. You have 15 minutes, Marcus. Talk. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. It's been hell, Elle. Theodore played me. He set me up to take the fall for the compliance issues. My lawyer says if I cooperate, I might get a reduced sentence, but the legal fees, they've bled me dry. My parents won't even return my calls. They changed the locks on the estate. He looked at me with watery, bloodshot eyes, searching for a flicker of sympathy. When he didn't find it, he switched tactics. He leaned forward, trying to summon the ghost of his old charm. I've had a lot of time to think, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I realized something. I made a mistake letting you go. You were the only real thing in my life. You were my rock, Ellen. You kept me disciplined. We were a team, remember? You and me against the world. He reached across the table. His hand shaking slightly, tried to cover mine. I looked at his fingers. Pale, unmanicured, trembling. He was reaching for me like a drowning man reaches for a piece of driftwood. He didn't want me. He wanted my stability. He wanted my strength because he had completely exhausted his own. I know you still care, he pressed, his voice cracking. You're a soldier. You save people. That's who you are. Help me get back on my feet, Elle. Just a small loan for the legal retainer. We can rebuild. I can consult for your firm. I pulled my hand back. The motion was slow, deliberate, and cold. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his rambling like a razor blade. I looked at him, not with anger, but with the detached clinical assessment of a commander reviewing a soldier who had deserted his post. We were never a team, Marcus, I said. A team implies mutual effort. I was your teammate, you were a parasite. You don't miss me. You miss the safety I provided. You miss having a guard dog to kick when you were frustrated and to hide behind when you were scared. You miss the grunt mindset you used to mock. He opened his mouth to protest, but I silenced him with a sharp look. You called me a grunt. You said I had a poverty mindset. But here's the reality. That grunt is gone. She was honorably discharged the night you threw her out. The woman sitting across from you is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar defense contracting firm. And as a CEO, I have a strict policy. I don't invest in bankrupt projects. Marcus flinched as if I had slapped him. Ellen, please, don't be like this. I have nothing. You have exactly what you built, I corrected him. I stood up. I opened my purse and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I placed it on the table, weighing it down with the sugar dispenser so the air conditioning wouldn't blow it away. It was more than enough to cover his coffee and mine, with a generous tip left over. He stared at the money, humiliation flushing his pale cheeks red. "You once told me that marrying me was a bad investment," I said, looking down at him one last time. "You said I was a liability to your image." I leaned in closer, ensuring he heard every syllable. "You were right, Marcus. I was a bad investment for you, because I am long-term equity. I require patience, integrity, and genuine work to mature. You? You're a day trader. You wanted a quick flip. You wanted the flash without the foundation." I straightened my blazer. "And now the market has corrected itself. You've been liquidated." "Ellen," he croaked, tears finally spilling over. "Goodbye, Marcus." I turned my back on him. I walked toward the glass doors of the lobby, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat on the terrazzo floor. Click, clack, click, clack. It was the sound of moving forward. I didn't look back to see him reach for the $20. I didn't care if he took it or left it. The past was dead, buried under a pile of bad decisions and cheap scotch. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the bustling street of Rosslyn. The sun had come out, and the air smelled of rain and exhaust and freedom. My future was waiting. That Saturday, the autumn air in Virginia was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and wood smoke. I drove back to my alma mater, but this time, I wasn't there to scrounge for financial aid or worry about tuition hikes. I was there as a donor. I stood on the stage of the campus auditorium, the same stage where I had received my commission years ago. In my hand, I held 3 heavy envelopes. They contained the first annual checks for the Booth Resilience Scholarship, a fund I had established specifically for female ROTC cadets from low-income backgrounds. 3 young women walked across the stage to meet me. They were barely 20 years old, their uniforms stiff and new, their faces a mixture of terrifying anxiety and fierce determination. Looking at them was like looking into a mirror that reflected 15 years into the past. I saw the same scuffed boots. I saw the same hunger to prove themselves to a world that often looked right through them. The valedictorian of the group, a petite girl who looked like a strong wind might blow her over, shook my hand with a grip that surprised me. Her eyes were wet. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. "You have no idea what this money means." My dad, he didn't think I could make it. I held on to her hand for a moment longer than protocol required. I leaned in, ignoring the microphone. "Listen to me," I said, my voice steady. "Don't you ever let anyone appraise you based on where you came from or what you have in your bank account. Real value isn't liquid. It's right here." I tapped my temple. "And right here," I tapped my chest, over her heart. "Protect that value with your life. Because it's the only currency that never depreciates." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, and stood a little taller. Watching her walk away, I felt a knot loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was there. This was the legacy. Not a penthouse, not a Porsche, but a ladder built by my own hands to help someone else climb out of the trench. Later that evening, I drove my SUV down the George Washington Memorial Parkway. I pulled into a scenic overlook near the Potomac River just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The water, usually a muddy brown, was transformed into a sheet of liquid gold, reflecting the fading light of the day. I shut off the engine and rolled down the windows. It was quiet here, save for the distant hum of traffic and the lap of water against the rocks. I allowed my mind to drift back to Marcus, to Catherine, to the cold marble floors of that Georgetown apartment. For a long time, the memory of them had been a jagged stone in my shoe, a source of constant, irritating pain. But as I watched the river flow, relentless and cleansing, I realized the anger was gone. It had simply evaporated. I didn't hate them. Hate takes energy. Hate requires you to keep an emotional tether to the person who hurt you. I had severed that tether. In a strange way, I was almost grateful for them. They were the opposing force in my life's training exercise. Without the crushing weight of their rejection, I never would have built the muscle mass necessary to carry the success I held now. I looked up at the darkening sky and whispered a quiet prayer. I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, just as the psalm said. It was dark, it was lonely, and it was terrifying. But the valley wasn't the destination. It was the path that led me to this mountain. My phone buzzed on the center console, breaking the silence. I picked it up. It was a text from General Holbrook. Tea time at Army-Navy Country Club, Row 800 tomorrow. Don't be late and bring your wallet. I plan on taking your money on the back nine. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of my eyes. A second later, another text came in from Sarah, my operations manager, sending a picture of her kid's birthday party with a caption. Thanks for the bonus, boss. You made this happen. My life was full. It wasn't full of gala invitations or fake friends who only liked me when the stock market was up. It was full of honest laughter, hard work, and people who would pick up the phone at 3 a.m. if I needed them. I didn't need a man to complete the picture. I didn't need a husband to open the car door or buy me flowers to prove I was lovable. On the passenger seat beside me sat a bouquet of fresh white peonies I'd bought for myself at Whole Foods an hour ago. They smelled sweeter than any dozen roses Marcus had ever ordered his secretary to send me as an apology. I stepped out of the car, standing on the edge of the riverbank. Across the water, the lights of the Lincoln Memorial flickered on, standing stoic and white against the night. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, free air of the Capitol. General Patton, one of the greatest warriors this country ever produced, once said, "Success is how high you bounce when you hit bottom." I had hit the bottom. I had hit it hard, face first into the mud, stripped of my dignity and my home. But I didn't stay there. I bounced, and I soared higher than Marcus, with all his leverage and connections could have ever imagined. I am Ellen Booth. I am a soldier. I am a CEO. But most importantly, I am the victor in the war for my own soul. I looked at the horizon one last time, nodded to the woman I used to be, and turned back to my car. If there is one truth I want you to take away from my journey, it is this: your value is never determined by someone else's appraisal. We often spend our lives trying to audit ourselves to fit into someone else's portfolio, trying to be richer, prettier, or quieter just to be worthy of their love. But that is a bankrupt strategy. The most valuable equity you will ever possess is your own character, your resilience, and your refusal to quit when life throws you into the valley. Do not let anyone treat you like a liability in your own life. You are, and always have been, your greatest asset. Now, I want to hear from you. I know I am not the only one who has had to rebuild a castle from a pile of rubble. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have supported you? Did you have to fight a battle no one else saw just to reclaim your dignity? Please share your story in the comments below. If today's story gave you even a spark of hope, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a battalion of survivors right here. Type, "I am a victor," in the comments to claim your strength today. Dismissed.